Hello and welcome to another episode of the Indoor Environment Show. I'm Bob Krell. I'm founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors Media. And as always, I'm joined by my co host, Mr. Don Weeks, coming to us live from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. He is the president of the Indoor Environmental Quality Global Alliance, IEQGA. Hey, Don.
Good morning. How are you today?
Good. It just seems like it was a week ago when we were together in person. Because it was a week ago
Yes,
when we
well,
were
it was
together in
exactly a
person.
week ago.
Yeah, so we were those of you who saw some of the live broadcasts we streamed last week, we were live at AIHCE 23 in Phoenix, Arizona. That was fun. So we got to do some interviews for
Yeah, it
this
was a good
program there.
time. Yeah, it was a good time. I
So
understand you interviewed like 18 different people there, so it's quite an accomplishment.
yeah, that we did a lot of shows for healthier workplaces for the AIHA program. So in addition to the indoor environment show, so yeah, it was a busy 3 days. I'm not gonna lie. So anyway,
Well,
today's show
good
super
show.
interesting. We're talking
Yes.
about air cleaners, and we have a guest who is a return, like you mentioned in the pre-show, first returning guest on this program. He was on our first episode of this program in 2021. Time
Yeah,
flies.
it's almost 2 years. It's amazing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
let me do the introduction. He is associate professor Pal Waki, who is graduated from the Warsaw University of Technology in 1990. He received his PhD from the Technical University of Denmark in 1998, where he has been teaching and performing research ever since. He has over 25 years of experience in research on human requirements in indoor environments. He is best known for his seminal work demonstrating that poor indoor environmental quality affects office work and learning performance. Other work influence the requirements for ventilation and air cleaning. Recent research includes studies of emissions from humans, sleep quality, performance of green buildings, gas phase air cleaning, and air quality in aircraft. So, welcome, Pal.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening to all that listen to us. And thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be back.
Yeah, we're happy to have you back too. I just want to mention that this particular appearance is sponsored by AW, AIVC. Sorry to everybody, AIVC. Thank you, Val, for being here. And today's focus is going to be on air cleaning. But let me ask you a few questions first to kind of set the mood for what we're going to be talking about. You had earned your master's, as I mentioned, from Warsaw University of Technology in Poland, and a PhD from the Technical University of Denmark. Can you tell us what was the focus of those degrees?
Well, surprisingly, my interest at that time was in heating. And uh, I made my master degree in heating of the residential, multi-dwelling house, multi-residential house in Poland. At that time, we came up with an idea. I had a partner, and we were doing together the job on writing the thesis. It was to retrofit the building, propose new heating system, and also reuse the heat that was generated in those homes, on those dwellings. At that time, we didn't speak much about, regeneration and reducing the CO2 signature and emission. And but we thought that it could be an interesting idea to reuse the heat that was exhausted in the ventilation system and use that heat to for preparing the domestic hot water. And for that purpose, we used a heat pump. And it was the time where in the high-rise multi-residential buildings in Poland, there was a requirement in a standard for the mechanical exhaust. That were houses that had a 10-story and above. So not for all of them, but some of them. So we were thinking that maybe that would be an option, and we could neatly show that that was actually a very effective solution Later on, I learned that in Denmark, a similar solution was used in the early 2000, I think. They didn't use a heat pump, but they used heat exchanger to actually prepare domestic hot water from the exhaust. Today, we use basically the what's called the balance systems, where you have a supply and an exhaust. So the heat is recovered on the heat exchanger. So basically, all the heat that is exhausted in the exhausted air is basically recovered and then brought back to the supplier.
So you did one of the early works on that, and now 30 years later, it seems it's starting to be used commercially, and that's great. It's good to see something you do when you're in university to see it all the way through to the present day.
But that was my only connection with indoor air, or maybe with ventilation. And then I came to Denmark, and that has completely changed my life. And then I got interested in indoor air and indoor air problems. So I completely changed my interest from the heating solutions to the ventilation solutions.
That's when I was looking at in 1996. You wrote a document on sick building syndrome in the office environment, measurements and evaluation for the Nordic Institute of Advanced Training in Occupational Health. Can you tell us more about the findings in this paper?
Well, I mean, at that time, sick building syndrome was a very popular term. In a sense that we characterize the buildings and how they perform. So the main key performance indicator was the prevalence of sick building syndrome. The term that was coined probably in the 80s that described the unusual occurrence of the symptoms among the building occupants that could not be explained by any of the condition in the building, so but by the general, all the conditions in the buildings. And those symptoms were related to respiratory symptoms, dermal symptoms, and the more general symptoms such as headaches and difficulty to concentrate, overall fatigue, and so on. At that time, I characterized the studies that basically brought and measured, used this method, and maybe characterize how it should be used, how it should be measured. It's not that simple to characterize the building using by deploying the survey among the occupants and basically asking them about the symptoms, because there are several aspects related to how you ask for the symptoms. Other symptoms should be recurring, so often occurring, what is the recall time, and what is the prevalence level. So there have been many different ways at that time to characterize buildings, that develop certain indices. Today, it's still used, but it's probably not used as sick building syndrome. It's maybe building-related illnesses or building-related symptoms.
Yeah, I mean, many people have changed to that. So you were at Denmark when you wrote this paper in 1996. You were at the Technical University going for your PhD.
Yes, exactly. It was probably one of my topics because during a PhD you need to take several exams, and that was one of the exams preparing me for the final dissertation.
And your final dissertation was on the sick building syndrome, or
no, it was on. I actually, my dissertation was on three topics. One topic was on the addition of pollution sources to determine ventilation requirements in buildings. So it is the question that is now addressed in 62.1, for example, when you have a rate for building and people, and those rates were you add them, and I was studying that at this during my PhD. Then the other topic was to better understand how we can perform sensory assessments. So I was looking at the different exposure response relationships and how people respond to different types of pollutants, trying to define sort of standard atmosphere that you could be exposing people to better, how to say, in order to be better prepare people for sensory assessments and have more repeatable results, and then reduce the variance. And then finally, I published the first work on the cognitive performance and air quality, where I showed that changing air quality in an office environment, it was a simulated office environment, may have an effect on how we work. And then that was continued and resulted in many publications that actually showed that improved ventilation or reduced pollution load in buildings will have positive effect on work performance.
Yeah, that I know is your, as I said in the introduction, your seminal work, and you've been working on that 25, 30 years now. Do you see more acceptance of that particular theory and more use of that theory now in buildings and in work environments?
I see a lot of interest in it. I can speak for Europe. And the reason probably is, I mean, I saw the peak in the middle of between 2000 and 2010. There was a lot of interest, but then it somehow reduced, and then now it's coming back. And one of the reasons is that when you renovate the buildings or energy retrofit buildings, the benefits that you see are maybe are very small, or it costs a lot, or the payback times are actually quite long. So that there is an interest in to make sure that during an energy retrofit, you are not aggravating the conditions for people, and B, for additional non-energy benefits when you retrofit the building. So, and of course, the work performance or maybe learning of children in schools is a metric that can be used for characterizing those non-energy benefits. They have actually very short payback time, so they are economically very interesting for this is why there is an increased interest. However, there is always however, and the problem is that until now we have not developed the productivity meter, in a sense that we don't have an instrument or a method, a tool that would allow us to measure in buildings work performance. We can measure that and we can demonstrate, but we don't have a tool that can be used in many different studies. That creates a problem in comparison and demonstration that what you promise is achieved. In a sense, if you promise your investor that you know, by investing so much money you will have that effect on productivity, how you can document it afterwards? You will need to have a tool for that, and
that's challenging, right? I mean,
that's a very
it's a little more abstract, right? It's
right.
Yeah.
So there are some ideas of how to develop such a tool, and we try to involve ASHRAE also to get some support on that. So maybe we will develop something, but until now it's so. This is one challenge. Then the other, you know, the other challenge is the how you interpret it from the economic point of view. So anyway, there are some challenges.
Yeah.
We know that
Yeah.
it helps, but there are challenges to implement it. I think metering it is the crucial part. So we can do we know that with the energy, we can predict the energy in the retrofitted houses or buildings using modeling. Often this modeling results would not match the actual, so there will be a gap, but at least we have some method of measuring it. Whereas in case of productivity, we don't have that standard method, and that is a major limitation issue. There's another limitation here is that is that we really don't know how the entire environment affects productivity. We see for the specific parameters such as, you know, thermal or specific domains like thermal environment, air quality, light, and noise. But when they are all together in the environment, because we are never experiencing only one of those, so how they together affect productivity. And we are starting a project now which is called Music, which we will be looking at that particular aspect of the combined effects of different parameters on our productivity. And hopefully we will be able to develop some method for measuring productivity as well.
I mean,
Yeah, I
that's
guess
always
I
been the
got
challenge, though, right? I mean, that's with all these studies, because there's
Right.
intrinsically, you know, there's an indoor a productivity benefit, but that's to quantify it, right? It's always
So what
been a
we think,
challenge.
yeah, what we think about is a sort of a battery of tests, or one test or two tests that can be verified against the actual performance. And once we have that, this can be used as some sort of a method of approximation. There are also other methods that are considered, such as there are groups that look at EEG, just to observe the brain signals and so on and so on. Of course, implementing EEG at this time on the mass base is very difficult, is probably not possible at all, even though we advanced with the instrumentation for doing this. But maybe through EEG, we could be able to develop some tool. So there is a lot of development there, but at the moment, we cannot propose anything that, you know, you just say, do this or do measure this, unless you have really an environment in which you monitor performance of your employees continuously. This is why, for example, absence rate is often used, and also self-estimated performance is used to do that. With the self-estimated performance, I would really warn many of the users that it may not translate into actual performance directly. That could be affected by many other factors.
well.
So
That's
I
thank
don't
you.
know.
Yeah, did you say
Very
that the
exciting.
new? And yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds. You said mentioned the new project. What did you say
That's
that the title of it is music?
music. It's
Eh,
a if I remember well, it's a multi-sensory network or something like that. So we have partners from Europe. It's a Marie Curie program for PhD students, which
mhm.
we have 10 PhD students in partners in Europe. Partners are from Germany, France, Cyprus, Italy, Denmark. And there are also observers participating in this, advisors from Belgium and two other countries I don't remember now. So the idea is to look at the aspect of energy and how we can adapt to the different conditions, and also how different domains, which we call domains is the environments like thermal environments, air quality, light and noise, influence, and how much what is the room for adaptability for us. So in our group, we'll have two PhD students. One will be looking at the behavioral aspects. So how behavioral aspects can be modified. So how our behavior can be modified by incentives and how the environmental conditions affect our behavior. And then the other one, PhD student will be looking at how those different domains affect cognitive performance. So how, when you have thermal environment together with light, together with noise, and together with air quality, how what is the optimal maybe level, or can they be combined somehow to predict our cognitive performance? So this is what we will be looking at. Very exciting. We've been thinking about this project for years, actually, and to look at the combined interaction of those parameters, combined effects. And now we have an option, and it's a large project, so we hopefully to will be able to advance that particular field that needs advancement.
That's great. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of your research. Hopefully, in the years to come, at conferences where we can meet up
Sure.
and talk about how we found out about this way back here in June of 2023.
Yeah, we just finished nearly recruitment of PhD students. So we'll have a very 10, now 9. The 10 is still in the process of selection. Very clever young people, or maybe not young, but I mean clever people who will be advancing that part of science. So we are looking forward to see the results and collaborate.
Yeah, no, it's really, I'm glad to hear about this. Really, it sounds like a really, as you say, exciting project to come up. Yeah. So today we wanted to talk a little bit about something that you talked about in autumn of 2022 when you presented a keynote speech about air cleaning at the AIVC Rotterdam conference. And the title of your presentation was "What We Know and What We Should Know About Air Cleaning." Can you provide us with an overview of what you discussed and what were the main points in the speech?
Right. So air cleaning is still debated a lot, and if at times it is very popular, at times it is less popular, and it is back on the agenda because of COVID-19 pandemic, but also because of the energy issues. So what I wanted to show is basically summarize what we know about the air cleaning processes, and then what are the major challenges for the future. So we can characterize, of course, the air cleaning process, and this basically principles are very well described. However, there are several unknown elements and still debatable issues in relation to the performance of the air cleaners. To name few would be, of course, the long-term performance of the air cleaners, lack of standardization of air cleaners. If I focus only on gas phase air cleaners, for example, use of the standard atmospheres to test the performance of the air cleaners and so on. So this is just few aspects that really need to be discussed. Also, we need to look at the energy impact of the air cleaners. So we take for granted that they can provide saving, but we really need to document that saving in relation to their efficiency. So this is something that requires further elaboration. Also, there are, to be honest, there are very different opinions about the air cleaners. There are people who prefer not to use them. There are people who would like to use them, and then there are people somewhere in between. And the reason for that is that there are different types of air cleaners. Some air cleaners perform well, some air cleaners perform not well. And in some areas in the world, you don't have to use air cleaners. I'm talking about the gas phase air cleaners. It's because maybe the air quality, outdoor air quality is good, and you can recover the energy from exhausted air. So the air cleaners are not the option there, but this is only a part of the how to say, a part of the world. Is in the most countries in the world, there is air cleaning is a necessity. Not only air cleaning for gas phase, but also for the particle air cleaning. Still in many areas in the world, we have the outdoor ambient air quality that is in a dramatic situation. I think recently we saw the report that was published, or paper that was published, that showed that still, for example, in Europe, average European is exposed to to the pollutants at the levels that are exceeding the recommendations by WHO. If I remember well, I don't want to now make a mistake, but it's only like 1% of the European population that is living in the areas where there is no exceedance. So we are all the time exposed to elevated levels of pollutants. The problem with that is that unlike light or visual environment that we can see, unlike the acoustic environment and noises and sounds that we can hear, and unlike the thermal environment when we can feel whether we feel hot or cold or neutral, the air quality of pollutants, we have difficult to sense them. It's difficult for us to say, I am now in the environment where the levels of particles is too high or too low. I can say it's warm or cold, it's bright or dark, but I cannot say whether particle levels are high or low. I cannot say whether NO2 levels are high or low. I cannot, unless I can smell them. So, and also I get very quickly fatigued. My sense of smell gets very quickly fatigued. So we are not very good in detecting this, and the prolonged exposure to pollutants is basically over and over with a small doses. It's slowly aggravating our health. And we, in the end, we realize that we've been all the time exposed to the pollutants, and we only see it when it happens that our health is, we have health problem.
And
It's
a
very
lot of
difficult
these,
for us to act on it in a
a lot,
sense without information.
a lot of what you're discussing here, though, would be ones that are directly related to outdoor pollutant levels, the high outdoor levels in many
But
cases.
but we have to remember that most of the time we spend indoors and we are exposed to ambient pollution level indoors.
Hmm.
So even though we say, okay, we are separated from outdoors by staying indoors, the buildings are not completely sealed, and those buildings that have ventilation systems, they need to have a proper filtration and proper gas phase filtration as well. And for the gas phase filtration is not non-existent, so we will be exposed to the pollutants, gaseous pollutants that are outside indoors. And then particles in many buildings, the particle filters are of a very poor efficiency, often poorly installed, with a lot of leakage on the in the air handling unit. So their efficiencies are very low, maybe 20, 30%, or maybe even lower. So in the end, we will be exposed to those pollutants indoors, also when we open the window and so on and so on. So we have to we cannot forget that we are basically immersed on those pollutants also indoors, and on top of that, we will have pollutants that are generated indoors.
So what are the three different, more of a fundamental question, but can you give the classification of the three different types of air cleaners that are currently available?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to characterize air cleaners, you will talk about the air cleaners that remove particles. So that will be particle air cleaners. And then you can have them by different ways of removing them. So you can have them mechanically removed, or you can use the so-called electronic. So you can either use electrostatic filters, so basically a charge, or the ions to remove them. And then you will have the air cleaners that remove gases and vapors. And so these are gaseous pollutants that are in the air that are removed. And then you will have the air cleaners that are specifically maybe designed for removing the biological contaminants. That could be, viruses, for example.
So those three
these are the
different
three
types.
groups, but
Yep.
in between you have the air cleaners that will be combining some of those. So that could be maybe an air cleaner that is combining particle removal and biological contaminant removal, or particle removal and gas phase removal, and so on, so on. So that will be another class of the air cleaners.
Are you seeing any one of these being more used than others at this
Oh
point?
yeah, the particle filtration is used everywhere, right? So this is a standard. But as I said, we recently published a paper, and this is a what is it? This is analysis of the measurements performed in the studies in United States in schools in which we measured particle concentration levels and also ventilation in 3 seasons. I don't remember number of classrooms now. And at the same time, we collected information on the absence rates of students in those classrooms, and we show clearly the relation between the particle levels and the absence rate. Of course, with increased particle concentration, the absence rates increased. Also, increased ventilation reduced the absence rates, as we have seen in the other studies. But in those classrooms, filtration was used. So there were filters installed. They were of a low class, MERV 8. And again, this is basically adding to my story, is that if you use the low quality filtration, and there will be penetration of pollutants from outside, and also because these are American schools, there will be a lot of recirculation, and then so the pollutants that are particles that are generated indoors, they will be also removed to some extent by those filters, but not efficiently. So particle air cleaning is, nearly everywhere. We have to also remember that those particle air cleaners, they often installed, they have been installed, not always now, but they have been installed also to protect the technical installations, so against the dust and the larger particles. So you can get clogged heat exchangers and cooling systems and so on, so on. So this is why you use those particle air cleaners. For the biological contaminants, probably I would say many hospitals, I don't know how many, but in many hospitals UVGI was used. So this is something that is probably used as well. The least I use the gas phase air cleaners. So any of the, maybe if you think about them, it's probably activated carbon filters are used in connection with removal of ozone or something like that. Air cleaners
So,
are used on aircrafts to the
Yes.
large extent, but not in buildings.
Bob, you had a question?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess my one question was, Powell, as far as the particles in those studies, how are they being characterized? Just by size, like the PM 2.5, or were they being characterized by actually what they were made up of? What were those particles of?
No, that is a standard procedure. I'm not a expert on that, but that is a standard procedure of testing particle air cleaners. So in that particular area, we are very well prepared to test, and there are standards and methods of characterizing the performance of the particle air cleaners. So, and we usually talk about, PM 2.5 and PM 10 here to characterize their performance. And sometimes even the lower particles. Now with the viruses, we were talking about HEPA filters, MERV 13 filters and up. So highly high efficient filters that are able to remove with a high efficiency those very, very tiny aerosols and small particles.
You'd mentioned earlier that obviously the pandemic drove a lot of the interest, perhaps on air, portable air cleaners in the indoor environment, and for better or for worse, right? Because there's some technologies that were probably rushed out to market that maybe weren't that validated. Um, but for the most part, during the pandemic, it was particulate collection, right? They weren't considering gas phase, so classrooms are still under ventilated, but you put a HEPA filter in there and you could at least knock some of the particulate load down, right? So, but I think there's, unfortunately, I think lay people conflate air cleaners. They think that a portable air cleaner solves all the problems indoors, and that's
No.
not really the case, right?
I think there are several names for the air cleaners, and also we talk about air purifiers and so on and so on. Probably air purifiers are more related to the gas phase air cleaning. If you talk about air cleaners, and if you go to the supermarket or any other shop that is selling those, usually they will be selling the HEPA. Sometimes they also have a carbon filter there, but most of them would have the HEPA filter or maybe highly efficient filter, and for removal of particles.
So there's a terminology that I've heard used a lot now, clean air delivery rate, or CADR. Can you kind of give us an update about that, and how is it used to characterize different air cleaners?
It's a debated terminology, right, or term. How to say, clean air delivery rate characterize the performance of the air cleaner. Actually, the air cleaner performance is characterized by 3 units. It's the efficiency of the air cleaner, and you can have a single pass efficiency. So how much pollutant is removed through when there is a single pass of the air through the air cleaner, and then there could be an efficiency that is multi-pass efficiency of the air cleaner. And then using the efficiency and the flow through the air cleaner, we can determine the clean air delivery rate. So the so the air cleaner can have a very high efficiency, but if the flow through the air cleaner is very low, then the additional dilution that is provided by the air cleaner is very low. And the third term that is often forgotten is so-called effectiveness of the air cleaner. So you always have to compare the clean air delivery rate. So how much additional dilution is provided for the specific pollutant is provided by the air cleaner. You have to compare it against the other means that are used to ventilate the space. So let's say if your clean air delivery rate or your air cleaner is delivering the dilution that is much lower than or not comparable with the ventilation of the space, even through the infiltration, then it has a very low effectiveness. So it does not contribute a lot to the space. It has I think for particle cleaners, the effectiveness is expected to be 80%. So it has to deliver nearly as much as the other means of the removal of particles. There is another problem with the clean air delivery rate. So unless you have a very well-defined pollutant, as it is for the particles, or maybe even virus, if you have aerosol of the certain size, and this is why the particle air cleaners were so popular during the pandemic, is that then you can characterize its performance, because you can say, okay, it can remove that type of particle with that efficiency and provides that additional dilution. And it's so effective compared to the other means of removal of particles in the space. However, so that can be done for particles, and we have to remember that clean air delivery rate of the HEPA air cleaner is only in relation to the removal of particles, or the removal or dilution of particles in the air. Whereas for the gas phase air cleaners, it's very difficult to characterize what type of pollutants it will remove. Usually, gas phase air cleaners are tested with one type of pollutant, or maybe maximum 5 or 6 types of pollutants. And those pollutants may not be the pollutants that are relevant for our conditions indoors, or for our health or comfort. So it's the question of how to say non-compliance with, or maybe not non-compliance. The question about, you know, what is the relevant, what are the relevant pollutants for which we should test the gas phase air cleaners. Here, we don't have standards for that, and we have very few standards and very limited, and that are not used regularly across different countries and producers. So it's very difficult for us to compare the quality and performance of different gas phase air cleaners.
And that was going to be my follow-up question about standards. From what I understand from your keynote speech, you discussed in some detail about the lack of standard methods to characterize performance of air cleaners. So can you give us a little bit of idea of what that's why we are having a lack of standard methods?
It's mainly about the gas phase air cleaners, perhaps, but for the particle air cleaners, I think we are very well equipped here with the standards. For the gas phase air cleaners, again, what is a standard atmosphere indoors? What pollutants we need to remove, and so on and so on. That is the major challenge for that. There are other challenges. We will be speaking about them in a moment, which address the method of air cleaning. But that is the challenge for that. And I don't know that the standards have not been developed. There are only, I think, 2 standards for gas phase air cleaners by ASHRAE, or maybe 3, but very few. So this is an issue that really needs to be addressed, because you can claim on your performance of the air cleaner, and if you don't have a standard to which you can refer, then it's very difficult to say whether this air cleaner will perform as is promised.
Yes, and that does bring me back to the one that you mentioned, which is that there are several challenges associated with the use of air cleaners. Can you kind of describe to us what some of those challenges are?
I mentioned the standard atmosphere, but there are 2 other important challenges. Some of the air cleaners during the air cleaning process will produce new pollutants. Basically, there will be transformation of pollutants into other pollutants. And in some cases, this transformation may cause that those pollutants that are new pollutants that are generated could be even more hazardous than the pollutants that are the pollutants prior to the transformation. So we don't have a methodology or the standard to basically characterize those products of those transformations. So this is one challenge. The second challenge. The third challenge is that many of the air cleaning air cleaners produce ozone. So now there's a lot of debate about ozone. Is ozone really dangerous, or is not dangerous? Or is it an issue, or is not an issue? And I think the problem with ozone is that WHO has the ozone recommendation of about 50 ppb, and that is the level that when you are exposed to ozone. However, presence of ozone will advance the possibility of the chemical transformation of other pollutants. So you may have a much higher level of ozone in the reactor, and that will create the conditions in which the pollutants can be transformed into new pollutants that we don't know what type of pollutants are created. Some of those species are really could be hazardous for us. This is one thing, and then the other thing is that during this process, new reagents will be created that will even participate or exacerbate the entire process of transformation into the new pollutants. So the ozone maybe at the levels that are downstream the air cleaners itself may not create a hazard. However, the presence of ozone in the air cleaner can create a hazard because of those unexpected transformation production of new pollutants.
Well,
so
and
this
these
is an issue that has to be addressed in the standards.
and these what makes that probably more challenging, right, is there's so many different potential pollutants that can be in the indoor environment. So to try to categorize what you're going to find on point A and point, building, B,
Yeah,
they're going
sure.
to be have perhaps totally different chemical composition. So that's a
Right.
challenge. And one of the other things that we see all the time is a lot of the marketing efforts in some of the companies that manufacture these type of cleaner products. Uh, they're somewhat confusing, I think, for the lay people. I mean, they claim to just pure air out the back end of it. All it makes is carbon dioxide, and nothing bad comes out of these devices, according to the
Right.
manufacturers.
There are papers that clearly show that even relatively neutral pollutants that should not participate in the reaction can be actually transformed into the pollutants that are hazardous. So this is the process that is happening, and we have documentation that shows that some of those air cleaners basically produce some unwanted pollutants. We need to be careful and create standards that allow to how to say, to characterize the air cleaners to ensure that those negative effects do not exist. Also, there are air cleaners that not use other against. Some of this in the position document were published on clean filtration, on filter and air cleaning, and some of it addressed in the position document that we are working on, and we hopefully publishing it later this year or maybe early next year. So to make it short is we need to make methods in order to make sure that the air cleaners do not create a risk for us. So on one hand, they may provide a benefit, and no one is objecting that some of the air cleaners will remove the viruses or will kill the viruses, or maybe will remove some of the pollutants. But at the same time, this process may create new pollutants, and we need to assess whether those pollutants that are created they constitute a hazard for the occupants of the buildings. At that time, because we don't have that information, the principle would be to basically try to avoid the air cleaners that may create such hazard until the issue is solved. That would be my advice, but it's my personal advice. So we are working on a standard in which we are now working on a standard in our group, or maybe the framework for the standard, in which we will have a two-stage testing of the air cleaner. And the first stage, we will be examining whether the air cleaner is not producing those unwanted products. So whether air cleaner is truly not aggravating the air quality. And then if the air cleaner is passing that stage, the air cleaner will be going to the second stage, in which there will be a very comprehensive testing of the performance with respect to different pollutants and pollution sources.
And this is a standard that you're working on for ASHRAE or another organization?
No, I mean, it's ISO is no,
ISO,
CERN
okay.
probably is trying to set up to create a standard. What we are, I mean, we are developing methodology that can go to the standard. So we are not like saying that it should be used by ASHRAE or CERN and so on. We try to create a framework, our methodology that for assessment and rating of the performance of our cleaners that can be then used in the standard. And this information does not exist, so it's important to have that process starting. And I think in the future we will be using more and more air cleaners. Our recent, I know that maybe I'm digressing a little bit, but our recent work on sleep quality shows that ventilation is very important in our bedrooms, or the removal of pollutants in bedrooms is very important for the sleep quality. So think about how many bedrooms do not have ventilation in and in how many bedrooms you cannot open window because there is a pollution or noise outside, or maybe there is security issue. And so we need to develop solutions that will ensure that you will have a high air quality in our bedrooms. And probably the air cleaners is one of the potential solutions. So, and in order to be able to apply it or to use it in our bedrooms, we need to better characterize them. So this is probably that will create a need to develop the standards and methods for assessing the performance of air cleaners. This is just one of the examples.
I was wondering, you had mentioned in your keynote that that the information on health benefits is noticeably missing from new and emerging technologies, many of which use special methods to remove and or destroy pollutants. Can you provide more information on this finding in your speech?
Yeah, it's we still, it's again, it is about the toxicity of the pollutants that are generated potentially or removed by the air cleaners. So I can say that our Belgian colleagues actually consider using of DALI metric to characterize our cleaners. So there is the progress there in which they would like to apply this. So for those who do not know, the metric is the DALI, is the disability adjusted life years. It is a standard method for assessing the impact of environmental factor or a certain disease on our life. And it's characterizing the life years lost from our work because of disability, and life years lost because of too early, when we die too early. So, and this is used as a standard metric for WHO. So DALI is using, WHO is using DALIs to characterize maybe the cardiovascular diseases, car accidents, and so on, so on. So you can refer and compare to this across different, impacts. And so what they try to do is they try to develop a methodology in which you would be able to characterize the performance of our cleaners using that metric. And that metric refers to actually health effects, because this is the disability adjusted life years. So this is the life years lost because of the disability, so health disability, or because of the premature death. So this is where this is a nice development, and I think it's nice to connect our field to health health aspects, just to see this not only through the eyes of comfort and not through the eyes of the WHO definition of health, which is very wide, but maybe also to look at the true effects on health.
That's interesting. You mentioned DALIs. I've read about them, but I have to admit I don't know the professor at Belgium that is doing that type of work. Who is it that's conducting that right now?
That is Professor Jelle Laverge from Ghent University.
Okay, I met him. Yeah. We probably should get him on the show, Bob.
You should get him on the show, because he's running also a very interesting project which is called Annex 86. It is within it's an annex within the International Energy Agency, which is looking at the smart ventilation, and DALI is used used as a metric to characterize the performance of the smart ventilation system, one of the parameters that define smartiness of the ventilation system.
Yeah, no, that sounds fascinating. We're running low on time a little bit, so I have one last question here. You mentioned that in your presentation keynote that there are basically no regulations concerning the byproducts of pollutants by cleaners, and some air cleaning techniques used and some produce ozone and other highly active reactives during the air cleaning process. I think we've covered some of that, but I wonder, do you have any thoughts on the lack of regulations? You mentioned there is some regulations for the gas phase, but why are we, oh no, I'm sorry, more for the particulate type of air cleaner. Why are they not for the other types of technologies that are out there?
It's hard for me to say that. Basically, I just want to say that 62.1 actually is referring to some note or some document that is talking about 0 ppb ozone. So, or a very low level of ozone is the same is actually in the position document for ASHRAE. So, so that is how to say. There is a direction towards better control of the ozone levels, because we better understand the transformations that could occur because of the presence of ozone indoors, and also those transformations that can occur in the air cleaners. Yet, what we really do not understand, and we need to understand better, is the health effects of the byproducts of those reactions. We expect them to be, many of those pollutants are toxic. The question is whether they would be occurring at the levels that truly have a negative effect on our health. I do not take any position on this. I would say that, principally, I would rather avoid using that type of systems before, as I said, before we better understand what is going on, or before the regulation is coming.
And that's the framework you were talking about before, basically, to come up with a methodology to measure this and figure out exactly what is taking place.
Right.
You mentioned 62.1. Their 2022 standard is out, and the next one will be in 2025. Do you expect that there'll be some changes in regards to these waste byproducts and ozone in the 2025?
I think it's 62.1 is referring to one document. I don't remember now which one is that. And that is something about 0 ppb ozone, but I really don't remember now. I'm not the specialist at 62.1, so we better ask the people who sit on the committee.
Yeah, I do that.
I sit on the committee. Ozone is very much discussed, and ozone is all the time with us, also outside. However, outside there is a high dilution also of the ozone products, and presence of ozone is also, not good for us, because there is a haze in many places in the world where there is a high traffic. So, we know the consequences from the ambient environment. We know more consequences from the indoor. I don't want to doom anything now and say, well, this should not be used. Or this. I mean, I'm saying what I want to say is we need to be careful and make the wise decisions here. So that's
good. I mean, I think that's what we all should be doing. I do sit on 62.1, so I know what you're talking about and how it's difficult to make changes in that, but I think it's coming down the pike. One last question: what is your thoughts in regards to air cleaners in the future? You mentioned that you expect that there'll be a lot more use of them. Where do you expect them to be used more frequently? In public spaces, or in education,
public spaces. I think if there will be a demand for improved ventilation in spaces, we will be seeing a need for, and if it will cost energy, of course, then we will see a need for developing solutions that will reduce the energy use, and that probably air cleaning here can play an important role. Again, without standard methods to characterize those, it will be very difficult to deploy them. And again, I mentioned bedrooms and or the sleeping environments generally, because that be hotel room as well. Many of those, it's very difficult to retrofit them with the adequate ventilation system. It will be too costly, and then it will affect the CO2 emission and so on and so on. So here I see the possibility of developing some retrofit solutions that maybe including the air cleaners, where we can improve the conditions in which we sleep. Not only the bed and bed linen, but also the environment in which we are immersed when we sleep.
Great. Bob, any last questions?
No, I mean it's a topic that's I think we're going to hear a lot more about. Obviously, the general public is much more tuned into air cleaning than they were 3 years ago. So yeah, it's again I think it's still there's a lot of emerging technologies that need to get better, and we'll stay tuned with it.
Right. I mean, it's, a lot of emerging technologies. And again, I want to say we should not, disrespect them or reject them. But before we really need to develop a standard methodology in which we can use to test and document that their performance is comparable or is better than the systems that are in use today. Uh, uh, be- Without this standard methodology, we will not be able to, first, we will not be able to document this, and further, we would not be able to advance the development of our cleaners because we don't know how they perform now, so how we can advance them. If maybe they are not very good on some aspects that require further advancement. So, we need to develop that.
Yeah,
It's
and
unavoidable.
that's fair, Powell. I think we need to have a unified standard so we can measure them
Exactly.
uniformly. Because you're right. Otherwise, we're at the mercy of just marketing claims by different
Exactly.
manufacturers.
Right.
So we're at
Well, I
that
want to
time,
thank
aren't
you,
we?
Kyle, for
Thank you.
coming
Thank
on
you very
today.
much for the invitation. And I
Bob, you
hope
want
the
to close
program
this
was
out?
enjoyable for the viewers.
Oh, I'm sure it was. I'm sure there's a lot of information that people didn't have before that they did have from this interview. So thank you. Bob, you
Thanks.
want to bring us to close?
Sure. We'll be back again in several weeks with another episode of Indoor Environments. The Indoor Environment Show is a collaboration between the International Society of Indoor Air Quality and Climate (ISIAC) and the Indoor Environmental Quality Global Alliance, the IEQGA, and it's produced by Healthy Indoors Media. And again, thank you so very much for joining us again, Powell.
You.
It was a great show, and we will see you all on a future episode in the not too distant future.